All right. Well, Logan Gelbrich, how the heck are you? I don't know if we do an introduction on webinar type stuff. I was saying this with Darren as well, but essentially, Logan, you and I met a little over a year ago or so, or no, yeah, probably a year or two ago. We did some stuff. We've linked together in this specific webinar. We're going to dive into the dichotomy of control, dive into decision making, dive into leadership. Look into how we can sort of navigate through making the right choices, which a lot of the platform we come off of is the essence of performance, is being a great problem solver, making great choices. So from my end, obviously it's great to see you always, but more so excited to peel into you. So from that start, I kind of look at it in the sense of what's the direction you want to take this down for people who are gonna chime in and listen to this.
Yeah, 100%. And it's good to see your face, big man. This is at the heart, I think, of the entire human experience. And I think what makes it topical and easy to talk about, or easier to talk about, is performance, and sport is one avenue of performance. But really everything that we're talking about right now is life in general, right? Making decisions based on the sort of the paradox in which we are living. And that paradox is a paradox because no matter what it is that you're doing, whatever the task is at hand, there are some elements of that task that you have direct control over and dominion over. And then there are some variables that are outside of our control.
Right.
And that is like the playing field for any task. And sport is a vehicle to talk about this at a high level that's very clear in the minds of a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But this is also true of everyday life. And what better opportunity than in the middle of a global crisis to talk about this, right? Because everyone now, whether you're a shortstop or a goalie or you're just a dude, we're all managing this paradox right now in the most universal way, maybe in the history of humanity.
Absolutely.
Because not only are we all subject to the same sort of, we'll call it negative external stimulus, we all know it, right? So there's been pandemics before, but the level of communication wasn't what we have today. And so we're all sort of in this same boat. And I think you're a guy like me that can hold space for the fact that, maybe hockey is a vehicle to talk about this. Maybe baseball is a vehicle to talk about this. And I guess to get into the nitty gritty of it, I'd like to raise the level of understanding and accountability to the listener in a way that might seem surprising, because almost no one listening to this would be surprised to hear the word process on this call, right? Like we can't wait to talk about process. And I am one of those folks. I mean, you are one of those folks.
Absolutely, hands down.
As a process-oriented individual, we know that this is sort of like the gateway to results. Now, in our world of like performance and people talking on the internet or whatever, the pendulum can kind of swing so far towards process that we lose the rigor of results. And I think, you and I have talked about sort of positive psychology, adult development, the expansion of consciousness, which isn't a hippie word. This is literally your ability to hold space and the size of your mental container. One very basic way to level up your capacity between the ears is holding paradox, like two opposing truths in your mind at the same time. And so this is all to set the stage for the main comment I would like to make is this is not just process, bro. All process. No, it's process inside of the container of we need results. And
Right.
results are not secondary. Results are not pretend. Results are not forgiven. Like, we need to win games. We
Yes.
need to move the bottom line. We need to do these things. And so it's important that it's not an either or conversation, and that it is a both conversation. And I would say the one thing that makes process the beautiful, powerful element that it is that we care about the results.
Absolutely.
All of that would go away if we didn't have this desire for the result. And that cannot be hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that has to be a real drive.
Yeah, I think that, two things, fascinating points that especially you're seeing right now is, I said this with Darren the other day, actually, and I think you and I talked about this, but when you get into a position, and if we funnel that into control outside of your control, before I get into that part, what really attracts athletes is the fact that everything is simultaneously happening. You don't know how it's gonna finish, right? So you really are forced in this process to get to that result. You're forced to constantly navigate in your mental space. Is that in my control or outside of my control, right? And to have that happening allows you to make choices. But when you're looking at a world pandemic or something that's happening in this position that is entirely outside of our control, you fall to the layer of understanding, and you used that word of understanding your mental capacity. You do fall to the layer of the tools that you've been exposed to, but now you are put in a position of how well did you understand the tool, right? And I think you see that in results, and I'd be curious to even have you peel into results even deeper and avoiding the process topic, if you will, and stay on that result side, is when you win or lose, what is the best way, or things that you look at mental space wise, that you actually understand the result? Because in sports, you could win a game and know you didn't really win that game, or you lost the game and you played well enough to win, because people will have emotional ties to a result. So what understanding are we getting from result?
Well, result is a bit of a call to action for best practices. Okay. And so this is the reason why I'm saying it's the glue that holds process together. Like, I was trying to think of a silly example. It's sort of like, if you took we'll go to an extreme. If you took a bunch of 5-year-olds and took them out to the park and be like, okay, you're the blue team, you're the red team, this is soccer. Okay. And in soccer, more goals means you win. Like, here are the boundaries, whatever. And then you put the ball in the middle, and then the kids just don't care, right? Like, they don't have the desire for the result. They're not invested in the result. So out of bounds doesn't matter anymore. Right. Whether the ball, like, I'll pick up the ball. Let's go to the slide now, right?
Yeah.
And when you lose the container for the result, then you're no longer held accountable to best practices. And so to your point, a more serious point, which is like, hey man, like, you can get a positive result and also be eaten away at the awareness that you didn't give a great effort, your process was off, etc. Right. And vice versa. My rebuttal to that would be, because there is a unique desire for these positive results, wins and losses, and getting outs and scoring goals and all of these things, then the introspection of that process is leaning more towards best practices, because you have to be curious about, how can I set myself up for more positive results next time? What is the best adjustment to be made, et cetera, et cetera. And that introspection, essentially the feedback process, or the reflection process of, like, here's what I was trying to do, here's what I executed, there's a gap here, I need to close the gap. That focus to that adjustment is only made possible by a desire or a need to have positive outcomes.
Absolutely.
Right? And the kids that are playing the fake soccer game that I just mentioned, not only are they not going to make an adjustment when they picked up the ball rather than kicked it, or they went over the line rather than stayed in the line, not only is that not in their lexicon, it never will be, because this isn't a desired outcome that they're after, right? And so this is my sort of like desire to raise the level of our kind of language we put out into the world, which is like, no, like process. And it's like, tell that to the Yankees, tell that to your favorite sports team. It's like, people lose their jobs if we can't get a result. Now, the paradox is there's nothing about the result itself that gets us the result, right? And so leadership and performance then is holding space for both.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, I am responsible for the result, and I'm smart enough to know that the only way I can contribute to that result is best practices over here in process, not one or the other.
It's a beautiful breakdown, man. I'm going to try to tie in some of the concepts that I touch on into that breakdown, because that's just well said, right? So I don't need to narrow that in. I think that's pretty clear. One thing that I think we look at a lot when people could listen to you and I speaking, or if you and I are listening to a coach, or we're at the Yankees and we're staring at the process that we just developed, right? You're looking at spring training or any of those situations where the process is in front of us. I mean, people who have a lot of success for the most part are pretty good at developing processes and then putting the right people in that to get the result, right? But in that, one thing that I've pondered and thought over for a really long time is, and I'm going to go back to the word understanding, but turn that into wisdom, which I know before we got onto this, I think I mentioned practical wisdom of developing choices. The thing that is really intriguing to me about that concept is because you're constantly you're flooded with knowledge, right? I can get this from you. I can get this experience from you of what you've had as a baseball player or a coach or an entrepreneur in that field of performance. But at the same time, I can't have your wisdom, because that's your experience. That's your dissection of the results. That's your anticipation of a choice or falling to the layer of a choice. And that practical wisdom essentially has to be developed through your own personal experience. So when we talk about those kids, the reason why I love the kid analogy, you have these 5-year-olds. Well, over time, that those boundaries that you eliminated, they're only going to keep playing that if the boundaries start becoming more real, right? Because a kid, as they develop as an adult and a human or high school and move on, result ends up taking the place of fun. Whereas when I'm young, fun is just hanging out and learning things and experiencing things, gathering knowledge, making my own practical wisdom. And that's the importance of environment. Whereas at the end, if you and I were to play a game together, ideally, it wouldn't be that fun to us at a level unless there was a competitive drive to win. And I would almost consider that is the boundaryless 5-year-old. Whereas what point do you think that switches in performance where you can have a healthy balance of competitively seeking and desiring positive results?
Well, I think just like you said, we are meeting our conflicts and our situations at the level that we are in that moment.
Right.
So there are plenty of ball players that what gets them to the next pitch or what gets them to the next play is a conversation that is completely unrelatable to the guy next to them. Mm-hmm. Like there is possible to be on the same team, so to speak, and be at two different levels of development,
Sure.
And so I think it's important, your use of information versus wisdom kind of dovetails nicely into Heifetz's work, which I mention all the time and I spoke about when I was out there, which is this sort of technical versus adaptive thing. And we do need to respect information, but also realize that more information isn't always better.
Right.
What we need is adaptation, integration. Like what can you truly integrate and use? What perspectives can you see? And so this is the reason why, you have former teammates who were with you every sort of step of the way in what you would call probably very developmental years.
Absolutely.
You're sort of like looking over, like being like, hey, did you catch any of that? Or because this is very confusing. You're still playing beer pong or whatever's going on, right?
For sure.
And so that is the wisdom part, the integration part, or what I would call the adaptive part, and so everyone is sort of interacting with their experience at their current level of complexity. Now, the hope is that the environments that we choose, high performance environments are great environments for this, introduce us to frame breaking information, disconfirming information, right? And so part of the reason why you were able to do a certain thing on the mound and integrate ideas that maybe your teammates didn't include, but are not limited to overcoming injury and trying to solve for X without the same skills as the guy next to you, and being introduced to information that broke your once limited frame to a little bit bigger frame. And now you've done that to transcend sport. You ask the question, oh, well, what about this is not just a baseball conversation, it's a sport conversation, it's a leadership conversation, et cetera, et cetera. Now, part of what's difficult about this is a paradox in and of itself, because life will, because it's out of our control, will introduce us to, on its own agenda, own time scale, disconfirming information. Right? For example, lots of people thought 1 month ago that March was going to look a lot different because they had no reason to believe otherwise. Now they have reason to believe otherwise in a way that they cannot unknow. Their whole frame about the future has changed. And that's a very specific example.
For sure.
Outside of our control. Okay. The leader listening to this, or the leader amongst us, would hear that, well, I don't really love to depend on things outside of my control because I don't really have much of a say. I don't have a lot of agency there.
Right.
Maybe that because Coach Harvey was saying that, man, I'm going to meet these challenges at my current level of wisdom or my current level of complexity, that maybe I can do something about this. And this is what you and I talk about with the people that we coach up, is that we can not just build, but seek out environments that will raise the level of that wisdom and that level of integration, which is very specifically adaptation, which is uniquely valuable right now because all of the information is available and we don't have all of the results, right? And so this idea of seeking environments and seeking the type of information that will grow us is, I think, our charter, right? And in my opinion, that's how we solve for what you just said, which is that, hey man, like, what about the folks who are going to meet this at the level of the 5-year-olds who are like, I don't get it, man. It's just a ball. And then we're in the park and we have a great time, right? We need to sort of expose individuals to environments that raise that ownership.
Well, something that really makes me want to even ask you to go deeper into that concept is, so think about how your way of framing, I love the term framing and breaking frames and having to constantly do that, which only happens at a level of experience. Like unless you are exposed to that framing or past framing or some sort of trigger, now we can't experience things moving forward. We can't create a new memory. I call it almost like if you think of your brain as a library of memory books, and if you don't break a frame, whenever you get into that next environment, you only have that certain book that you read, right? So that's how you're making choices. So if that's become poor choices, poor results, if we tie back to the beginning of this, if we're getting too many poor results, well, then we have to create a new book. We have to create a new book in the library. And so tying into that in the sense of, where do you think it is that, because this would always be, and I guess you can say agree or disagree on this concept, but this would always be subjective when we're talking about awareness or your own consciousness. Would you think that is a subjective thing, or do you think that you can tie that into an objectiveness of understanding your ability to be aware of, is that good, bad, or did I adapt? Because many times, obviously, I agree with you, in the performance field, the goal is to adapt. The goal is to evolve. That's what's happening right now to a global world, which is aligned with you, I think is amazing, right? But at the same time, how do I know that my awareness of subjectivity is adapting and it's trending up?
This is, so you're using two very meta words, and these are the two words that we would need to use to explain this very thing: subject and object. Okay, subjectivity and objectivity. Okay, in this moment, this may be like meta and difficult to understand, but in this moment, you, Harvey, are likely extremely subject to your perspective. It's probably very difficult for you to see that you have a fixed, small perspective of reality. And it is through adaptation.
Yeah.
50-year-old Harvey would then look at Harvey today objectively and say, oh, that was Harvey then, and he could see these things, and I can point to that and judge it and evaluate it for what it is. But right now, it is your world. It's sort of like that commencement speech, like, what is water? You know, where like says to the fish, you know, how's the water? And the fish is like, what's water? Because the fish is subject to the water. Okay.
Correct.
And the relationship between subjectivity and objectivity is the exact relationship or the dynamic that we experience when we reach new levels of consciousness. Okay. And the subject object shift is literally the process of no longer being subject to your reality and then being able to see it, right? It's sort of like, and I'll try to explain this in most basic terms. Okay, there's a certain stage of mind. Some of the people listening to this right now maybe don't realize it, but they are in a certain stage of mind that is quite socialized, meaning, okay, the values that they have, their understanding of what is important, their understanding of the rules, their frame of the world is mostly given to them by some sort of socialized structure. Okay, so like when you and I were young ball players, we understood what was good, what a great uniform looked like, how you were to act, what was important, the characteristics that we thought were the characteristics to have were a lens that were given to us, right? It's like a pair of glasses. Okay, so if I'm 12 and I'm looking at Harvey and you're literally wearing glasses, so we'll roll with it. It's like
dropping.
That's right. So if I was great, I would see what Harvey sees is the perspective through your lens of the world. Like you think certain things are valuable, like a blue collar attitude, getting up early, eating certain things, et cetera, moving a runner over on second with less than two, all these frames, right? Okay. At some point, when I get to that place, I start to realize there's a lot about this that I care about, but this is not the limit of my view. I also see other things are important. Right? I can see that there are these artists over here that don't believe any of those things, but have understanding of high performance and admirable qualities and all of these other things. And this is the sort of self-authoring stage where we have our own sort of view of the world. Right? People grow up into this view. Okay. What is the limit of that level is the same limit of the previous level, which is you don't realize that you're stuck in this place. And when we can have this subject object shift where you can say, hey, I have glasses on. Like I see everything like how I see it.
Right.
And that's not how it actually is.
Right.
This is my experience. And so the subject object shift is one of usually distance, which is why I like to talk about meditation here, right? It's like meditation in a weird meta way is the act of making what we are subject to object, because regardless of your style of meditation, whether you're counting your breaths or whether you're doing some sort of mantra or whatever style you're practicing. Meditation is an act of observation. Observation of what? Observation of you.
Right.
And so now I'm no longer subject to the moment. I'm trying to make it more objective.
Creating that space for it. Yeah. Yeah.
And the sort of the last way I'll try to ram home the subject object shift is I often tell it this way. It's like everyone who's listened to this has once stubbed their toe on something, right? Okay. Think about the last time you stubbed your toe, Harvey, whatever that was. You kicked the door frame, you kicked the table, whatever. It's horrifying, right? It's the worst of all time. Okay.
Always.
But now as the boys are on here riffing, it's funny. Like you have so much distance from it that you remember it, you look at it as this like ironic thing, etc. It's completely objective to us. We have distance from it, we can point to it, call it for what it is, see it in context, etc. But then when you stubbed your toe, the same way that I stubbed my toe, our whole universe was the toe being stubbed. When I last stubbed my toe, as I remember it, there was no such thing as taxes. I was not hungry. I had no place to be. I wasn't tired anymore. I was completely subject to this experience. And what I'm saying is that every human being that's listening to this is subject to their experience right now. The future, better version of you and I and everyone listening would be able to look objectively at this stage because we have sort of owned it and transcended it. And we can do that on purpose.
Yes. And that's through meditation.
It's through meditation. It's through disconfirming information. It's through anything that is driving adaptation consciously. Right.
Well, yeah. And well, that's where I think it comes into the power of questions. That's where even my ability to ask you questions or likewise, or people, and at any level of that, we give ourselves some objectivity because now we're going to basically fill that. And I think that that's important to do on your own end as well, which I believe you touch on that as well, of asking yourself questions. You asked me a question last summer to ask myself, to just ask, is that true? I don't know if you remember that. I was in that room of yours, but I love that concept. Is that true? And what you're tying in is I'm visualizing what you're saying and looking at it as a whole, is that we have things in place that in the moment I can create space and observe and ask questions to it, title it, create wisdom to it. And then also you get excited to look at that 50-year-old Harvey. You know, what book author type story can I create in the next 20-year span? And be able to see improvement, which would ultimately be the adjustment of change that I think people don't give themselves enough credit, because we'll look at as performers of how we got to break the frame of even what people see us as. And I would think of as yourself when you first started college to who you were as a freshman in college to who you are now, and people who knew you as a freshman in college and know you, but they're not close with you now. You know, so they would see you as that Logan, but that's not Logan, you know. And it's also where I would look at what you're saying is really hitting me hard with thinking about whenever you're riding on intuition, whenever you're observing choices, and then you're going to take a chance at improving that to get better results. The first thing that you're typically going to get backlash from is from people who are very close with you, friends, family, anything in that circle, because they do see you time and time again. So now when you're getting ready to make that internal choice, typically they're having their lens of how they see you, and they are now going to project what they think you're about to do or doing. And that's where I think a lot of people will get stuck. And I'm just looking at this in a position of going back to in control, outside of control. You know, in your control, that's all advancement of wisdom, advancement of taking knowledge, asking yourself, seeing opposing sides of it, debating on it on your own end, and then turning that into a position of choice and objectify it and advance, which is adaptation. And a large part of that, that's why I wanted to nail on the meditation part, because you have to spend that time in that space. Because if we go off of your glasses analogy of the lens, everyone around us is also perceiving us a certain way, and they talk to us in a way that they perceive us.
Yeah, the notion of being able to point at your lens and see it for what it is extremely valuable. Earlier we started this conversation talking about the glue that holds this all together is the result. I've never met anyone, and I ask the room every time I speak to a room full of people the sort of borderline rhetorical question, is there anybody here that is not interested in being a bigger, more capable version of themselves?
Right.
Or is anyone here, in order to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, would not need to be more capable than you are right now? And everyone is in agreement that they need to grow. They want to grow. The things that they want in life would require them to be more capable. Okay, so that is the result. That's the positive outcome that we want. Well, if you do what we just said earlier on this conversation, if that's the thing that I've put on the wall that I'm chasing, it begs the question, what are the best ways to do that? And the best ways to do that are not by seeking confirming information, not by reinforcing what you already know to be true. It is by finding the frame-breaking information or the experiences that will develop that outcome. And this is the paradox of itself, because a lot of our behavior, like as human beings, isn't that. Everyone wants more. They want growth, and their behavior looks like, I don't want feedback that doesn't feel good. I don't want to seek out experiences and information that would prove me wrong.
Yeah, break my frame. Right.
Right. And so, okay, cool. Well, then these are the things inside of your control that you can actively do to grow, or you can, not to be disrespectful or morbid, or you can wait till you get cancer, wait till someone in your life dies, wait till financial hardship happens, wait until adversity strikes in whatever form it's going to strike, and then you'll just learn the lesson then.
Yeah, because then you're going down to the layer. Yeah.
Yeah, or you can just actively learn them on purpose. And then when those things come in, they'll come in, but I can develop on purpose with the things that are inside of my control. And leadership or, high performance people, whatever you want to call it, are the types of individuals who are willing to do that, right? Who are willing to drive adaptation with the pen in their hand, right? With agency. I am choosing this. This is inside of my control. I willfully seek adversity. I willfully seek this confirming information.
Yeah, I think that comes down to I love how you just tied a bow on that concept. I think you really came full circle to really put some action steps for those who are listening and putting yourself in a position of that. I mean, really, when you simplify the whole conversation we just had in high performance, is getting inside that frame of understanding yes, no, inside, outside, and then experiencing life, inviting adversity and struggle into your organism as a whole so that you're forced to adapt. And during that adaptation, have tools and practices in place where I can enhance my subjectivity, I can enhance my awareness, and knowing that as I'm developing through life, I'm going to be optimizing these choices and these behaviors. And that's going to put me in the position for optimal results. That's sort of the thing. The Yankees are the Yankees. They don't win the series every year, but they put themselves in positions to get that. And that's what we need to do as performers. And along the way of making continuous choices, you're going to have better experiences and you're going to figure out the right results.
100%. And there's a humbling reality that hopefully most folks who are listening to this have already learned. But if you haven't learned it, it pays to learn it sooner rather than later, which is that if asymmetrical results or these positive outcomes, winning championships, making more money than you did last year, whatever the thing is, if that is what you're enrolling in, then it pays right now, today, to change your relationship with dissatisfaction.
Yes.
Because this feedback loop, by definition, means there is dissatisfaction in the system, because the goal has to be a stretch goal. And some people want to accomplish great things, but almost are set up for just a long road of hardship, because they think that there's this place where you go and it's just slam dunk time. Right. And so the way in our model that we talk about leadership then, or being a high performance person then, is sort of signing up for there always being a gap. The thing that you're trying to do is a little bit elusive, and you're saying, I want that, right? I want to chase it as if it's possible. And I'm going to own the feeling and the responsibility of ending up short of the line. And I'm going to reinvest in the process. And I'm going to do that forever. And we want communities and people. I mean, it's the reason why, part of the reason why we hang out and get along is because I see in you a willingness to vulnerably enroll in that process.
Likewise.
The big P word.
Right.
And that is the life of someone who is trying to be high performance. Right. It is not like home runs and backflips all day, you know. And so that is the work. That is the paradox, right? Is in the process of doing that, you get great results. They're just not as great as you wanted them to be ever. Whether you're Michael Jordan or Serena Williams or whatever, it's still not what you wanted. It's the greatest of all time, but you're so enrolled in the process that that's the only way you can get close.
Accept the never ending, you know, accept the never ending. Well, that was beautiful. I look forward to continuously pushing out these sort of opportunities for people to dive into. So hope you guys enjoyed, and Lug, we'll keep moving it forward.